Segment 2.
All right, before we start the second segment with the same group, I want to give you a little audience feedback. Most of you who registered took a little survey. Largely disagree here that the status quo policy culture is serving the best interests, because that's the core of our question. You largely disagree that we need more government in our lives. We strongly agree down here that Rhode Island is in desperate need of a new public policy approach. So that's just some of your feedback. And looking at this, it looks like we have a reasonably conservative audience out here. I think I could tell that by the clapping as well. And we'll show you your surveys in the second segment as well. All right, our second segment here is we're going to talk about specific solutions for Rhode Island. All right, so let's keep it to these ideas. In Rhode Island this year, there is discussion about raising the minimum wage. There is discussion about cutting the sales tax. There is discussion about lowering or repealing the estate tax. There is more discussion, as we've heard, about income tax up or down. Where do we go? What's going to help with jobs? These are the topics for this segment. Thank you.
Great. I think Wednesday night I sent out an email to all the participants, and I asked that it be a lively discussion and feel free to interrupt one another. They've done a masterful job on both those tasks. Tom, why don't you start us off here?
Stephen was recently complaining that that government costs too much. Well, in fact, I agree. There is, I think, a significant amount of waste involved in government. I'd like to talk about some of the things
Can I ask one question to frame this? And this comes from trying to grow a business.
Yeah.
Are we a little too small?
What does that mean?
We've got some costs that are
you asked a question already, and I started an answer. And
Yep.
Don't you think I'm allowed to?
I'm trying to give a little more framework to it for the value of the audience.
I see. So I can't talk about government waste?
You absolutely can talk about government waste.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. The waste I'd like to talk about is there's a lot of stuff that is not widely examined. Stephen, because he doesn't know that much about Rhode Island, may not be aware that in 2010 we actually borrowed $40 million in order to give a tax cut to wealthy people. Now I think that's waste. I don't know. Borrowing in order to give a tax cut to people, that seems like waste to me. Here's other waste I'd like to talk about. I don't know if any of you in this audience have ever applied for welfare or food stamps. You may not be aware that there's 210 people on the staff of our state whose only job it is to review applications. And part of the reason they have to do it is because of the application. Here's the application. It is 14 pages long. It is impossible to fill out without help. So we employ 210 people whose only job is to help people fill these forms out, to help people to audit the information that they use in those forms. And that, it strikes me, is an astonishing example of public waste. In order to make sure that not a single person gets a single penny that they don't deserve, we spend millions and millions of dollars trying to save what turns out to be a pittance.
So Tom, is there, I think anybody who's interacted with state government sees inefficiencies at every place, lack of application of technology, lack of forward thinking, and some of those may be tied to some of the issues of modernizing government.
And some of them may also be with the rules that are actually in place. I mean, people talk about the rules that are holding back businesses. Well, you know, in theory, that sounds like a good thing, but in practice, what some of those rules are the rules involved with keeping water clean. For example, I learned this morning that my favorite donut shop, its well is being threatened by a car dealership next door. Now, I happen to think that the environmental rules that should have prevented that should have been enforced, because I value that donut shop. I value the livelihood of...
Here's the good news. We have a number of donut shops in Rhode Island. Stephen?
we do indeed, but is it fair to that owner?
No, absolutely not. I don't mean to minimize it, but Stephen?
So please, 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 please do not raise your minimum wage in Rhode Island. I mean, you have the highest unemployment rate in the country. You know, I think the facts are pretty clear that when you raise the minimum wage in an environment when jobs are already so scarce, and by the way, the real unemployment.
Wait, Stephen,
Tom,
I have to stop.
Tom, you
I have
can't.
to stop him because
No,
he's about
Tom,
to say something.
Tom, no. You cannot suck all the oxygen out of them. Tom,
I will cede my time so he
you'll,
can say
you'll,
what he has to
you'll
say.
you'll get an opportunity to respond in a minute.
So if the real unemployment rate in Rhode Island is not 8%, it's more like 12 or 13% because you've got people who've dropped out of the workforce, you've got people who can't find full-time jobs in the state, and it's a tragedy. It is an injustice what's happening. Now, I don't have a big problem raising the minimum wage when you're at full employment and there are all sorts of jobs. What you will do is if you raise your minimum wage in the state of Rhode Island is you're going to destroy a lot of the starter jobs that people need when they're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. My first job was working for $2.30 back in Illinois in a warehouse at the minimum wage. It's one of the most important. How many of you started your first job at the minimum wage? Most people in this room. Why do we want to saw off the lowest rungs of the ladder, keep people out of the workforce? It's the absolute worst thing you can do. I want a high-wage society. I want Rhode Islanders to make as much money as they can. If you raise that minimum wage, you're going to put a lot of young people out of work. They're not going to get that first job. And at the very least, if you raise your minimum wage, this is really serious stuff. If you raise your minimum wage, at least, please have a starter wage or a training wage or a teenage wage so that young people can get a job at, $6 or $7 an hour. You get the best training. We talk a lot about job training. You all know this. What is the best job training? It is on-the-job training. We do a real disservice when we price unskilled, low-income people out of jobs.
Justin?
If Tom wants to jump in and refute a point, I'll allow it. Yeah. That's okay with you.
I only wanted to prevent Stephen from making a terrible mistake because what happened in January was that the minimum wage actually went up, and what happened in February was the unemployment rate here went down. I am in favor of looking at the world as it actually is, not as we imagine it would be. That's all.
You have a small business? Well,
Hey, I'm just saying those
Justin.
that's what happened.
if we're talking about policy here, if Stephen made a mistake, I'll give you an even bigger mistake. 38 studios is an even bigger mistake.
You expect us to disagree?
Let me start off by saying, during this segment, we want to talk a little bit about a safety net as well, too. Government certainly has a responsibility to provide for people who fall in hard times. As I said earlier, my dad was unemployed for some time. It's difficult. But government also has a responsibility to provide an economic environment that is conducive to job growth. And when you are ranked 46 in terms of state business tax climate, you're not going to get that. And the Rhode Island government is not fulfilling its responsibility of providing an economy that is allowed for growth. So, as I said earlier about 38 studios, one area where we should definitely cut funding is from the Economic Development Corporation. Not one more dime of our money going towards picking winners and losers. Because when government gets involved in picking which businesses will win and which ones will lose, we lose as taxpayers.
Sam, I'm going to ask you to take on the issue of sales tax and whether or not there should be a public policy change on sales tax. The center has been a very strong advocate of, in the ideal world, Rhode Island would have in their mind, a huge competitive advantage if we went to a zero sales tax or some significant opportunity to make Rhode Island more competitive by being lower than our neighboring states. I'm wondering if you can take that issue on.
Sure. So unfortunately, math is real. And if we were to abolish the state sales tax, you couldn't make the budget balance. So it's not a realistic, serious public policy suggestion. Sure, I don't like sales taxes. They hurt poor people. They hurt growth. It's not my favorite tax. I would rather shift our tax burden to income taxes, which are less regressive and I think are better for economic growth. But honestly, if there's a regressive tax, there's a place where Rhode Island is overtaxed, it's property taxes. Providence, according to one study, is the highest property tax on businesses of any comparable city. That's a problem for your core business district. We need to fix that. We need to increase state aid, the state aid that we cut to pay for the tax cuts for the rich so that we can get some property tax relief. If there's a tax where we need relief, it's property tax, not sales tax.
Stephen?
Yeah, you need a Proposition 13 in in Rhode Island. You're right about that. I mean, you're
Private
property
weed
tax.
law.
We have one. It's called S3050. It was passed several years ago.
Well, my point is, you're making the case that property tax is the problem, and I agree. I think the property taxes are too high in Rhode Island. I think the sales tax is too high in Rhode Island. I think the income tax is too high in Rhode Island. The other one I want to mention, we haven't just, I know I've used a lot of time, just the estate tax. You know, oh my God, we have to have a high estate tax, tax the rich people, you know. The problem is, guess what people do when they get old in Rhode Island and they have money? Guess where they go? Hey, how many of you know rich people who moved to Florida in this room? Everyone does. You're not gaining virtually any revenue from your, I would make the case if you abolished your estate tax, you would actually increase your tax revenues. Because guess what? When millionaires leave this state, that means they don't buy things here, so your sales tax receipts go down, they don't pay income tax here. Why do you want to chase out your wealthiest people? Those are the people who are important because they're business owners, and they're also you know, people who buy things in the state and buy property. I think, could we all agree it would probably be a good thing to do to get, if you're not going to get rid of your estate tax, at least don't have one of the highest estate tax in the country, because people will go to Georgia, they will go to Florida, they will go to Texas, they will go to Arizona and pay nothing. And why would they stay here? And for the privilege of dying in Rhode Island, if you have a $10 million estate, you pay $1 million.
Tom, take on the issue of first sales tax and then estate tax. Briefly.
Something that people should be aware of is that the governor actually tried to lower the sales tax in 2011, and I believe that it was people in the predecessor organization to this one that did the yeoman's job in shooting it down. What his proposal was to cut a point off the sales tax and broaden it to cover other services to make up some of the loss. But the very idea of broadening it to previously untaxed services was so anathema to people that the proposal just got shut down. So, I mean, math is math. You know, I think that it's actually fairly irresponsible to advocate tax cuts without being very specific about what exactly you think the government does that is extra that you don't want it to do anymore. I am actually fairly specific about it. There is waste that I've identified in our administration of different programs. There's waste that I've identified in the financial business of the state. There's waste that I have identified in how the state does its bonding. These are real examples of waste that I think we could do without. The people who are advocating for lower taxes should be forced to be specific about what exactly you think the state could do without.
Estate tax.
As far as estate tax, as far as the estate tax goes, it raises about $44 million. If you want to advocate doing away with that $44 million, you need to either demonstrate that there is $44 million that you feel that we can do without.
But Tom, let me ask you a question. Is there ever a situation in which a public policy change on tax policy could actually have a positive effect in economic growth? Is there ever a situation,
Obviously.
picking up Stevens?
Obviously, what Stephen said is completely true. The property tax, what people don't understand who rail against the corporate income tax is that no income means no tax. The corporate income tax never put a business out of business. The property tax puts businesses out of business all the time, every day. And the fact that state policy over the last 20 years has stuck it to the cities of towns, has stuck it to the property taxpayers of this state, is widely ignored when people are at the State House advocating for lower taxes. The fact is that we have lowered taxes at the state level year after year after year, and to make it up, we have stiffed the cities and towns over and over again. We have forced them to do things and not provided the money to do it. We have actually created laws that forced them to spend money that they did not have. That's where state policy needs to look, and that's that, I think, would be a place where we could actually see an economic gain. But we're not going to see it so long as people are peddling misleading statistics about state policy, and that's what I'm talking about today.
So,
Josh, if I could just...
Yeah, please.
Can I just jump in quickly? You know, I think it's great. You know, we're pointing out, you know, certain things, you know, that are wasteful, and Tom pointed that out. You know, I think there's a misnomer though that Tom pointed out in saying that, you know, somehow if you reduce taxes, that you have to cut services. I think certainly we can go through the budget of Rhode Island and find waste and fraud and cut that out, and certainly I think we could both agree that we'd like to do that. However, I think one of the important things to point out is that if you cut taxes and you attract businesses to Rhode Island and you have more people working, you have more income to tax itself, and so you can garner greater revenues through that means. So it's not fair to necessarily say that because you cut tax rates that you're necessarily automatically losing revenue. You can recover revenue by actually putting more people back to work, which is clearly an issue we have here in Rhode Island.
I'm going to have to jump in here because, as I've said before, math is real. It's not a left-wing conspiracy. If you cut taxes in 1 year, you have to balance the budget in that year. So you have to pretend that your tax cuts are going to automatically cause an enormous surge of growth to make up for that. And the reality is that the state doesn't tax a huge portion of the economy. If you exclude the cities and towns, it's in fact less than 10% of the economy. So you have to say that in 1 year, you're going to make up not just the state is not just going to grow by the amount of those tax cuts, it's going to grow by 10 times the amount of those tax cuts, and that's just not realistic. That's why you actually have to pay for tax cuts. That's why that is standard budget practice, because that's what actually happens.
I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to start on with Stephen and come across 30 seconds. If you're governor for the day, you went to that Heart Association event and you bought at the auction governor for the day, and you get to make one public policy change in our tax structure. What would be the tax policy structure? And then I'm going to ask Justin,
Sure.
Sam, and
So if you want to make Rhode Island a very prosperous state again, and you want to, if you have the courage to change, and if I'm governor and I can wave that wand, why don't we make Rhode Island, this great, great state, the ocean state, why don't we make Rhode Island the 10th state in this country without an income tax? And if you want to see a booming economy, the 9 states that have no income tax, Tennessee, Texas, New Hampshire, Florida, Nevada, Washington State, they are booming today with almost, there's one exception, Alaska. Every other state is doing really well. Let's do that. Let's get rid of the income tax and let's get the economy moving again. All you need is the courage to change. The only argument I'm hearing today, quite frankly, from you all is keep doing what you're doing. And if you think that the things are going well in Rhode Island, then do that. But if you have the courage to change, I think you could bring jobs back to this great, great state.
Justin?
Well, look, I think it's very difficult to say, there's one, kind of, magic bullet that's going to, fix everything. But I agree with Stephen, though. I think, we can't keep up with the status quo. I think one thing I would do is a substantial reduction in the sales tax. I know the center has advocated to abolish it. I think a substantial reduction. The reality is Rhode Island needs to stand out economically somehow. When you think about New Hampshire, you think no sales tax. So I want to go shop in New Hampshire. Many people, who live in border towns in Massachusetts, they do just that. And it hurts businesses on the border in Massachusetts. I guess to get down to the central point, it really comes down to job creation. When you create jobs, you have less people unemployed, you have more people paying taxes, and also, too, when you have less people who are out of the labor force, oftentimes wages increase as well with that. So we can battle about a minimum wage increase of $1 or $2. I'd rather see people getting good paying jobs in Rhode Island, but we have to change course, and I think it starts with cutting taxes, providing the services that are necessary, and getting people back to work in Rhode Island.
Just one quick point first. The governor doesn't really have a lot of power in this state. If you can make me speaker for the day, here's what I do. Our top goal on tax policy is very simple. Repeal the tax cuts for the rich and use a big chunk of that revenue for middle class property tax relief.
That is not a solution.
How is that a solution?
That is not a solution.
Excuse me. There will be an opportunity for questions from the audience. Thanks.
The other thing I'd say, Stephen, is that if you think that we are advocating for the status quo, you are actually not listening very carefully. Our perspective is that the status quo is what you crave. We have tried tax cuts for rich people over the last 20 years. We have cut taxes in 1990 for rich people. We cut them in 1994, we cut them in 1995, we cut them in 1997, cut them in 2001, 2003, 2006. These are all real things. What happened? The economy got worse. Property taxes got higher. I mean, I think that we should take the world as it is, not as we imagine it ought to be. And I think that the status quo is roughly what Stephen has been proposing. We have tried tax cuts over the past 20 years. We have tried them repeatedly at the state level, and what has happened is it has gotten worse. Now, I think that that's experience worth learning from, and if you feel that your model of how the world works blinds you to the actual reality of the last 20 years, then I would not like to get behind you in your advocacy of these policies. I think that we owe it to ourselves to look at what has actually happened and not be misled by the labels. And I think that we owe it to ourselves to learn from that and to do something different. And that's what we are proposing. Thank you.
Tom, you're a rational being. On almost every ranking related to the economy, to business, to where to put your business, where to grow your business, where to invest, Rhode Island ranks somewhere between, in the last year's rankings, 41st and 49th in about 10 different rankings. And so perception becomes reality about what states are good to grow and build businesses. What would you do to help change that reality or perception?
I think that the task, the situation that we're in has taken 25 years to get here. The idea that we're going to get out with any particular magic bullet is a fantasy. And it has been people who have followed that fantasy that have gotten us into that trouble. People have been looking for the magic bullet. They think that tax cuts for the rich will do it, so they try tax cuts for the rich. They think that $75 million to a video game company is going to be that magic bullet that does it, so they try that, and it blows up in their face. We have tried these magic bullets, and they have not worked. What has worked, at the same time that we've been failing, what has worked is right next door in Massachusetts, where 25 years ago, they actually decided to put money into education. They actually did the hard work. They laid the groundwork. They worked on their both the state education system and the public, elementary and high school education system. They improved it. They made it a magnet. They now have a more resilient economy than virtually any other place in the country. They do not have mineral wealth, and so they don't have the employment boom that North Dakota and Texas are having right now, but they have a solid, well-performing economy. We are not going to solve our problems without that same kind of application and hard work, and to imagine that there's some magic bullet that we can just pull out is just a fantasy.
But that doesn't really answer my question. My question is, what would you do? I understand that it may take a significant period of time.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. It is going to take a long time. And am I a dictator for a day when I can come up with a magic bullet, or am I a dictator for 20 years so I can guide the process to make it happen? We are not going to get out unless the populace, unless all of us are willing to support the kind of investment that we need to actually get out. And if all we are is the kind of population who only demands what's going to be the answer that solves it for us tomorrow, then we are going to blunder from one public policy disaster to another, the whole time wondering what's going wrong. Is that a better answer?
Slightly. Stephen, same question. Oftentimes in business, as you know from your Wall Street Journal days, perception becomes reality,
True.
Especially amongst business leaders, and they perceive states as being good places to be or not good places. And sometimes it's not rational. And your opening statement on Rhode Island really being a special place that has a number of assets we don't get much benefit from. But talk a little bit about what are some of the things that could help transform these rankings and perceptions about Rhode Island being
It's
not
a great question
particularly-
because, perception is reality in a lot of ways. And, Justin talked about various ratings. I could point to probably 10 different ratings out there. CEO Magazine, Tax Foundation, da-da-da-da. All of them basically putting Rhode Island somewhere in the, you said 41 to 49. I see, almost everyone I've seen has them 45th to 49. So there is a perception, even if you don't agree with those analyses, and I think they're pretty spot on, there's a perception out there outside of Rhode Island that Rhode Island is not a pro-business state. And people don't want to move to a place that is not perceived. You need a flashing neon sign to the rest of the country saying Rhode Island is open for business again. And part of it is attitudinally. Stop treating businesses in the state and stop treating entrepreneurs like they're enemy combatants. When you talk about the, raising the top tax rate, what you're talking about is taxing businesses. And we know that 2/3 of this income that you're talking about you want to raise taxes on, Sam, we know that's small business income. And there's an old saying, if you tax something, you get less of it. If you tax something less, you get more of it. So I think part of it is perception. I want to make one other quick point. Please don't let, I just got back from Michigan. I was in Detroit. To see what's happened in Detroit is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to see what's happened to that city. I'm not saying that Rhode Island is Detroit, but I am saying if you stay on the path you're on right now for the next 20 years, Rhode Island will be Detroit, and you're going to be a bankrupt state. Let us veer away from that future.
Justin?
Right. I think, Steve hit the nail on the head. One of the points I know, Tom and Sam have been bringing up Massachusetts a lot throughout this. I'm originally from Massachusetts, actually, and, we have one of the best education systems actually in the country. Many rankings show 1 or 2. Now, but here's the issue, though. You've conflated, I think, funding and performance. Funding is not really the only or main component as to why Massachusetts has been successful. We all, as someone who went to an inner city high school, it's actually been deemed underperforming. We have some of the most rigorous accountability standards as well, too, that come from the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education in the country. So it's also about accountability. I know we don't want to get into a discussion about education. We'll save that for another day. But the other thing I wanted to say is I agree with what Steve said. We can't treat businesses like they're villains in this state anymore. We have to treat businesses like they're friends of the people, because they are. They give people jobs. We should encourage businesses to be here. And so, we've brought up a variety of things throughout the day, and I don't think raising the income tax is the way to go. If you look at a state, for example, like New Hampshire, they have no income tax. They have no sales tax. They have a much lower unemployment rate than Rhode Island, and they still provide good government services for a lower cost than Rhode Island does. So I don't see how raising taxes is a solution at all. If anything, we should be looking at reducing taxes, making the state more business-friendly, of course improving our education system and making sure that it's well-funded, but also providing a competitive environment for businesses to grow.
Thank you. We're going to go to Sam, and then we're going to take questions from the audience via Twitter. Sam?
So first, let me just talk a little bit about Michigan, because Michigan is an interesting case study of where you've seen a historically blue state get taken over by the right. Michigan has a Republican state legislature. It's one of the most extreme in the country. Michigan actually has more conservative public policy than Rhode Island. And you know what? It's not working out very well for Michigan. I think in Rhode Island, we have this focus on these business tax climate indices that the Democratic, sorry, not allowed to use that word, that the conservative majority party in our state loves. But I disagree with those rankings. I think their methodology is flawed, but I would agree that we have a tax problem in this state. And I agree that it hurts businesses. And that's part of the reason why liberals in the state are very concerned about the tax that even the Tax Foundation in their business tax climate index survey agrees is the biggest factor determining business location decisions, and that's the property tax, which we raised on businesses to pay for income tax cuts for the rich, which was a really bad idea and something we want to repeal. So if we're talking about tax policy, let's talk about that.
Thank you. First question up comes from the audience via Twitter, and it's really, Tom, I'll ask you to tackle it. What can Rhode Island do to be more competitive on a global standpoint?
We have this idea that motivates some of the conflict that you see here. I mean, apart from the There's this idea somehow that our salvation will come from outside, that by making our state attractive to people from elsewhere, that somehow that will make it better for us. I think that that's a fallacy. I don't think that there are angels waiting to descend on us when these indices get improved. I think that improvement of the economy here in Rhode Island is only going to happen by the long, hard work of growing it ourselves. And policies that are aimed at attracting people from elsewhere are generally misguided and don't usually pay off the way that people hope that they will. I'm familiar, for example, with a town in Maine, Belfast, Maine, where MBNA showed up years ago to put a call center there. And everybody was delighted about this call center and the great new jobs that were part of it. And in fact, it did make the economy of Belfast, Maine much better for a few years. And that's about how long it lasted. It lasted about 7 years. And then MBNA got bought by Bank of America, and they decided that Belfast, Maine just wasn't really the place for them. And now Belfast, Maine is back struggling again.
Is the tallest building in Belfast, Maine empty, just like when Bank of America bought Fleet Bank in Rhode
And
Island?
in fact, it is the tallest building in Belfast, Maine, I'm pretty sure. I mean, the idea that the salvation is going to come from anywhere beside the hard work that we do to improve the economy, beside fostering the entrepreneurship and the resources of the businesses that we already have, I think is a fallacy. We need to work on growing our own. And the idea that we're going to get there by appearing higher on that by making our state attractive to people from elsewhere, that somehow that will make it better for us. I think that that's a fallacy. I don't think that there are angels waiting to descend on us when these indices get improved. I think that improvement of the economy here in Rhode Island is only going to happen by the long, hard work of growing it ourselves. And policies that are aimed at attracting people from elsewhere are generally misguided and don't usually pay off the way that people hope that they will. I'm familiar, for example, with a town in Maine, Belfast, Maine, where MBNA showed up years ago to put a call center there. And everybody was delighted about this call center and the great new jobs that were part of it. And in fact, it did make the economy of Belfast, Maine much better for a few years. And that's about how long it lasted. It lasted about 7 years. And then MBNA got bought by Bank of America, and they decided that Belfast, Maine just wasn't really the place for them. And now Belfast, Maine is back struggling again.
Is the tallest building in Belfast, Maine empty, just like when Bank of America bought Fleet Bank in Rhode
And in
Island?
fact, it is the tallest building in Belfast, Maine, I'm pretty sure. I mean, the idea that the salvation is going to come from anywhere beside the hard work that we do to improve the economy, beside fostering the entrepreneurship and the resources of the businesses that we already have, I think is a fallacy. We need to work on growing our own. And the idea that we're going to get there by appearing higher on some index of businesses is just not going to happen.
So one of the tweets that came in is a question of, and I'm going to ask Stephen to start on the response, is there a indicator that shows shifting property tax, giving property tax relief, and shifting that burden to income taxes, regardless of which strata within the income tax? Is there any proof that that policy has been successful?
No. You know, we do a ranking of which are the worst taxes in terms of growth and which is there's no good tax, but which are the least harmful taxes. Just so you know, the most harmful tax is the income tax, and the reason for that is that's a tax on entrepreneurs and small businesses. The second worst tax is the corporate tax. And by the way, I bet Tom and I could sit down together, and in 15 minutes, we could the two of us who probably disagree on 90%, we could probably sit down, Tom, and come up with a better corporate income tax system than you have here. You're exactly right. You've got a high tax rate. It raises no money. What's the point of that, right? What's the point of having one of the highest corporate tax rates in the country and not raising any money out of it? I'm with you. Cut the rate, get rid of the loopholes, and you're going to have a more efficient system. One other just quick thing, Sam. Detroit. There is not a Republican with 100 miles of Detroit. It's hard to blame the problems of Detroit on conservatives. But you know what?
Which party controls the Michigan House of Representatives? Which party controls the Michigan State Senate? Which party holds the Michigan governorship?
You know what? It's interesting because this is a good news story about what could happen in Rhode Island. You're right. For the last 4 years, you've had a Republican governor. I know we're not being partisan. I'm not a rah-rah Republican. I always say the reason I know Republicans are the pro-life party is because they always find themselves in the fetal position. So I'm not a big Republican. But I will say this: the good news story, because Michigan has been a state actually that's performed worse than Rhode Island over the last 25 years. You know what's interesting? There's a renaissance going on in Michigan right now. This is the great untold story. You want to see the potential of what could happen in Rhode Island. Go to places like Grand Rapids. And by the way, I'm even bullish on Detroit. I think Detroit has hit rock bottom. Bankruptcy, they're going to come out of that. I wouldn't be surprised if Detroit makes a comeback. But Michigan is a state that's growing again. And that's because they've adopted a lot of the policies that I'm talking about. So if Rhode Island were to take that route, it's amazing how quickly you could make a comeback here.
Okay. I want to thank everybody. We're wrapping up. We're dead on time. Stephen's got to catch a flight. I really want to
missed that plane. I will be unemployed. So anyway, thank you. By the way, Mike Stenhouse, thank you. Freedom Prosperity Center. If you really want to help this state, put another 0 on your check to the Freedom and Prosperity Center.
Thanks, everybody. We're going to take a...
Sam, thank you for being here. It's been really fun debating you guys, and I think we learned a lot. I think I think there's some room for agreement here, don't you, about how to fix this state. So thank you very much.
And I have a book for you.
All right, thank you, Steve. He's got to catch a flight. Thank you, panelists. All right, so while we change things up here, pick up the mess that Tom made, how about another celebrity? How about a few more of some political celebrities? Ron, while we change things up, just 3 or 4 minutes. Go ahead, Ron.